we're here in this spot for a really specific reason. So I want to say welcome to all of you. My tone today is going to be a little bit different than it sometimes is, because our purpose today is a really, really serious one. We're gathered here in this spot here on purpose for a really important reason. Our goal is to commemorate or remember a terrible, life-altering day in American history, to learn about the life of one of our alums, a man named Andrew King from the class of 1977, and to reflect on our individual and collective group responsibility to play a role in creating the world as we want it to be. So many of you know that on 9/11/2001, a coordinated attack happened on American soil, with the attackers hijacking a series of planes and crashing them in various places into the Pentagon, into the World Trade Center, into a field in rural Pennsylvania. In each of those cases, lives were senselessly ended. Young lives, older lives, all ages in between, each person, a friend, a family member, a loved one, a colleague, a really important individual with life left to live, with contributions to society ahead of them. Our world was not as good after their loss. It was a terrible day, whether you were connected to it or to someone, no matter where you lived. The effects of those events and the days immediately following echoed loudly and continue to ring in our ears today. But in a strange way, it was also an event that carried with it the potential to unite all people who believe in peaceful resolution to problems. People from different political parties, religious traditions, ideological backgrounds, and places in the world were brought together to condemn violence, hatred, and needless bloodshed. The 20 years that have passed have made us less unified. But I would ask us today, even though we are all different, to put aside those differences when we think about what we're thinking about today, to believe again in the basic good of peace and unity, and to understand each of our roles in bringing that about. None of you sitting on the ground here were alive on that day. And you may know it from pictures you've seen, or from videos, or from documentaries, or from the way your parents describe it. None of us who was alive or who were alive that day will ever forget it. All of us were participants in history. We each have memories of that day, and it is the nature of history that those memories will be similar and different at the same time. That's what is called perspective. How old you are, where you live, your background, all of those things matter. I'm really appreciative that Mr. Rudiger has offered to share with us his memories of that day, and I'd like to call him forward now to do so.
Morning, everybody. So in 2001, I was a sophomore in high school, and as you guys know, I was overseas in the country of Nigeria. And about 4 days before the beginning, or before September 11th, we had actually started a period of civil unrest where I was living, and we were actually locked down in our houses. But on the afternoon of September 11th, we were in our house, and our neighbor comes over to us and tells us that as he was watching the news that afternoon, a plane had hit one of the World Trade Centers, and told us to come over to his house so that we could see what was going on. As we entered his house and watched alongside his family, the second plane hit the other World Trade Center. And I remember looking around at the adults in the room, and you had this understanding that this was a very significant event. It not only was it significant for the people that were here in the US, for our families, but also significant for the rest of the world, where even though we were in a different country halfway across the world, people were stopping and realizing that this was a day that things had changed. And in the 20 years since, something that I've come to realize is that throughout history, each generation has different life-changing events, some good, some bad. But one of the most important things that we can learn from these events is the legacy is not just the event itself. The most important legacy is how we handle the event and the lessons we choose to walk away from with. And so we can choose to be afraid to not do the things that we think we need to do, or we can use those events to encourage ourselves, to inspire ourselves, to make the changes, to be the people that bring about the good we want to see happen in the world. And so as you go through your lives, as you experience whatever events are going to happen for your generation, think about how you will respond to those events.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rudiger. That's a beautiful thought to share on this day, and also a great way to move to talking for a minute about Andrew King. So we're here in this spot. You walk by this all the time. And you may know that this garden behind us is dedicated to an Elgin Academy alum, Andrew King, from the class of 1977. I wanted to make sure that as we reflect on this terrible event, we also ground ourselves in this spot and remember that this event that we're talking about today, which is a moment of history now, happened to really normal people just like us. Elgin Academy, with its really long history, was tragically affected that day, even though we're very far away from where most of this happened. So many places, as we just heard, were affected by this all over the world. Andrew King was 42 years old. He was a trader for a firm called Cantor Fitzgerald in New York City. He had a wife and 3 children. The children were the ages of you all. His family is going to spend tomorrow, the 20th anniversary of this event, playing golf, because that's the game he loved and where he was most himself. We all have those things where we feel most alive. That was it for him. At Elgin Academy, AK, as he was called by all who knew him, was a really good friend. He was the one to whom others turned. He was a really good athlete who was competitive and skillful, and he was a great teammate. He went on from Elgin Academy to graduate from the University of North Carolina. Some of you may have heard of someone who's moderately famous named Michael Jordan, who went to North Carolina at the same time as Andrew King. Andy lived after graduation in Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, before he settled with his family in Princeton, New Jersey. He loved his family. He loved to golf with anyone who would play, especially his brother and his father and his closest friends on the world's greatest golf courses. He gave of himself to others and knew that connections at home or on the golf course or at work or anywhere were the most important things in the world. So when I describe him, you probably can think of something in yourself. There's something you love. There's a great friend you have. There's a person you turn to. Every person who died that day was that for somebody. When he passed away, some of his classmates rallied, even with their grief, in an effort to make this garden happen. So not only did they pay for it, but they came and they dug the garden out and they planted it. So they created a beautiful tribute that will sit forever with a plaque to their good friend. At the celebration when this garden was first bloomed, right in this spot in 2004, Sean Purcell, who is another alum and a fellow, was a student, a classmate of Andy's, said about him, he was my best friend. He was bold and charismatic, full of energy and spirit, and had great wit and charm. He commented that his memory would, quote, help us have courage in the face of bigger foes, believe in ourselves, and know the meaning of friendship and love and honor. That's how the people who know him remember him every September 11th. So as we consider his life and think in our hearts about his family and everybody who was affected by his loss, we also know that that day resulted in thousands of stories just like this. So I'd like to call forward Jack Guyette, and thank you for volunteering, Jack, who's going to read a quote from a ceremony. You can come up, Jack. Just like this one that was held last year. This quote is from an unknown source, but very, very well captures why this was such an important day. So you can read it from there, Jack. You can read it from here if you want.
On this day, September 10th, 20 years ago today, 246 people went to sleep in preparation for their morning flights. 2,608 people went to sleep in preparation for work in the morning. 343 firefighters went to sleep in preparation for their morning shift. 60 police officers went to bed in preparation for the morning shift, for the morning patrols. 8 paramedics went to sleep in preparation for the morning shift. None of them saw past 10 a.m. September 11th, 2001. In one single moment, life may never be the same. As you live and enjoy the breaths you take today and tonight, before you go to sleep in preparation for your life tomorrow, kiss the ones you love, snuggle a little tighter, and never take a second of your life for granted.
Thank you. Jack, thank you for being willing to do that. That's a great message. And I wanted to share that with you. I wanted Jack to share that with you, because if there was a message that Andy, as I have learned about him, would want you to have today, he would not want us to be sad. But what he would want you to do is to think about a couple of things. One thing he'd like you to think about is how important this minute is. How important it is to live every minute to its fullest. The other thing he would like you to think about is what the world you want looks like. And what can we each do, all of us, students, adults, what can we each do to make it a reality? He would want this day not to be a sad one, but to be a day of hope for the future, with the message that Jack read, with the message that Mr. Rodiger shared with you. So I'm going to ask, as we finish up, we're almost done, I'm going to ask that we all, even if we're daydreaming a little bit, that we think quietly for a minute about anything that this makes you think about. But maybe the thing to think about is, what can I, as an individual, do to make my world, whatever that is to me, it's my friends, it's my family, it's my town, what can I do to make it better? I'm going to ask that we all sit quietly for a minute. Maybe close your eyes and think about that. Let's do that, please. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I want to thank you all for a couple of things. I want to thank you for participating in this. Sometimes history isn't fun to think about. Today's one of those days. Tomorrow's one of those days. Sometimes it's not fun to think about. So thank you for being willing to do something hard. Thank you for being so respectful. I want to ask now, from here forward, that when you walk through here, when you play, remember a couple things. Remember why this garden's here. Remember what that plaque means. And remember that whatever it is you're doing, whatever you're walking to a game in the gym, you're walking over here to play, that you do it as if it's really important. Because that's the message he would want us to have out of today, that every minute we have is really important and needs to be treated that way. Okay, thank you everybody for being here. Middle school teachers, I think we're going back to our next class, right? So you can get up and do that. I'm glad to talk to anybody who would like to. I encourage you at some point in the next couple days to read the plaque in the garden. And I hope you have a great rest of the day, and thank you very much for participating.